皆さん、小さな光を最大限に集めて鋭く華麗に。
見事な攻撃でしたわ。
皆さんの力を貸してください。
見事な攻撃でしたわ。
皆さん、小さな光を最大限に集めて鋭く華麗に。
見事な攻撃でしたわ。
Hey guys, Misery here, back with another Elysium video, and in today's video, we're doing the ultimate full guide for Heidemarie, the newest unit in Chaos Zero Nightmare. In this video, I am joined with my friend Gordon. He is in a lot of my videos, you may know him. It's very informative, there's a lot of theory crafting and testing, has every unit in the game at E6 along with their radar partners. So if you enjoy this guide, I do have previous guides on my channel, such as Diana, Rita, Typhera, 9. You can go check those out if you're new to this game or you're a new player, coming for the half anniversary of CZN. A quick disclaimer right before we get into this video, we ranked every epiphany at a certain tier, with S being highly recommended, A being strong potential, B being awkward to use, kind of like niche, C being outclassed, and F being practically useless. This is just our opinions. You know, if you have a different opinion than us, that is totally fine, but this is where we think everything should generally go. So what does Heidemarie do, and like what is kind of her like mechanics and playstyle? So Heidemarie has this new effect called Linked, which no other unit in the game has. Basically what Link does when this card is used manually, discard all other linked cards in hand. So units that scale off of discarding, such as Renoa, Diana, Heidemarie, all want their cards to be discarded. But Heidemarie also has another new effect outside of Link called Effulgent Light Stacks. And when you get these stacks to 3, it'll turn your Effulgent Compression into Effulgent Release, which is like her main nuking card that does a ton of damage. As you saw in the beginning of the video of the clip I put, this does upwards of like 200k in like one turn. And if you're scaling her over the majority of a few turns, such as the clip in the beginning where it was 8 turns and she did 2.4 million damage with Orlea, then this stacks pretty highly because Effulgent Release scales and gets added to the base. And when cards have base scaling, multiplicative buffs go insane on them, which is like how you get so much damage on Heidemarie and like why Orlea is kind of like really good for her. But the main way you're probably going to be playing Heidemarie is with Effulgent Expansion. You're either going to create a ton of Effulgent Blades in the discard pile for the nuke build and scale Effulgent Release that way, or you can create a bunch of blades in hand with Effulgent Expansion and just go to town on the enemy. And Effulgent Blades are extra attacks, so in Effulgent Blade builds you want to actually run extra damage substats on Heidemarie.
Linked is not quietus, so if you discard a linked card without it having quietus or a discard effect, it literally does nothing. So you have to be careful what you use.
Yeah, a lot of people think that linked is the same as quietus, but it actually is not. So like if you're discarding a linked card, it's not going to activate it unless it has quietus. Just keep that in mind, because I see a lot of people thinking that Heidemarie is kind of like Diana. Yes, they do share some similarities, but Heidemarie is a linked unit, not a quietus unit like Diana, despite her having the quietus tag on some of her cards. Her main gimmick is linked. Then getting into Heidemarie's cards, her basics, Sword Flash and Sword Barrier. So ideally you want to remove both of these if possible. I recommend removing Sword Barrier first and then Sword Flash, because Sword Flash actually has some use instead of Sword Barrier just being shield. If you can't remove Sword Flash, ideally you want to, but it's not the end of the world if you can't, since it buffs Effulgent Blade for 1 turn. That is 30%, which is 1.5 morale. And if you've been playing this game, morale is good on units that do a lot of hits. It gets more value on low multiply cards that you spam a lot rather than high multiplier cards that you spam a lot. But at the end of the day, morale is good value for units that use a lot of cards. And yeah, those are her basics. Just remove them. Ideally you want to cycle your decks and make them thin every turn, and the thinner the deck is, the easier it is to cycle every turn and get the most value. And then moving on to Heidemarie's first epiphany card, which is called Sword Rain. Epiphany 1 for Sword Rain, this attunement, create 2 Effulgent Blades. This is the best and really easy to use because you actually don't even need to use the card to create the blades. Basically what attunement does, when you draw a card with that effect, it'll activate that effect. So attunement, create 2 Effulgent Blades. You just draw this, you create 2 blades for free, 0 AP. Very cost efficient. Not really much else to say about this except that it's good, and it has quietus, by the way. So the cards with linked and quietus on Heidemarie are actually going to get a ton more value, because as we know, quietus activates on discard. So not only do you not have to use this to get the create the blades, but you also don't have to use this to even activate for the damage.
So this second Sword Rain is okay. The only issue is that it doesn't have quietus, so you have to be manually playing this for 2 AP, and the ceiling for this is not that terrific either, right? You'd rather be scaling your other cards. Third Sword Rain is S tier because it goes very well with coordinated attackers, right? So we have the best coordinated attacker in the game, which is Selena. If you activate Sword Rain 5 times in the graveyard with this one, it will proc your high-powered scope, your drone bombing skill, and your drone bombing upgrade. So this specific interaction makes it so it's a 5 times 4. So it's 20 hits in total. And obviously you can also pair this with Hugo, but Hugo doesn't actually have as many coordinated attacks as Selena. Hugo has more draw than Selena, but Selena does more damage than Hugo. And with 4 of these sword rains, it's 40 times 4. This is very, very strong. But the deck that you need to facilitate this combo, you need 3 divine decks for this. So I don't know how realistic it is, but the ceiling for this card is extremely crazy.
Yeah, after the latest patch where they added 20 divines into the pool, it's definitely going to be a lot harder to make divine decks now, even with the deck changing items that we get from Swordy. But getting on to the 4th sword rain, this sword rain is actually pretty decent in Swordy or Chaos itself, but you know, general use save data content, not the best, doesn't really have like too high of a ceiling. You create 2 Effulgent blades, then apply retrieve to those cards. So you create the 2 blades, you use them, they go to the graveyard, they come back since the retrieve, and you can use them again. So it's not horrible, but there are better options. And then onto this 5th sword rain, this 3-cost exhaust finale one, 600% damage to all enemies if Effulgent releases in hand, exhaust it, and plus 100% damage amount to this card for each Effulgent blade in graveyard. So basically, this literally just turns into Effulgent release, but AoE version. So it takes the same effect as Effulgent release. It has a pretty high base for the 600% damage to all enemies. The only problem is it has exhaust, and it ends turn after using it. So it's basically like a nuke one-time card. You can never use it again since it exhausts. It's honestly not bad because I used it in my E0 showcase in my last video for Heidemarie, but after you use this 3rd sword rain, then Effulgent release is your main nuking card.
There's no reason to not pick the 5th sword rain when you're playing the nuke build, because 1, it has retain, so if you don't need the AoE that turn, just don't use it. You could just keep it in hand forever, right? And you don't want to be taking the other sword rains because the other sword rains will actually eat up Orlea's damage buffs. So this is the only one that you can really use for that nuke comp. You know, it exhausts itself, right? That's pretty bad, but I don't think you need AoE that often, right? Like maybe there's like one boss that requires AoE, and then if you're using this, you're probably one-shotting them, so you don't need this more than once.
And yeah, that is the epiphanies for sword rain ranked and what we think about it. First one S tier, second one C tier, third one S tier, and the last 2 are B tier. Moving on to the next card we have, which is called Hero to All. So this card, Hero to All, is one of Heidemarie's worst cards that you may want to remove in most decks. Alongside Thread of Light, they're kind of like at the same power level. All of other Heidemarie's cards have a lot more value and, you know, give her more. Not to say that you can't keep this, which you can in some comps, but if you do want to make the deck as thin as possible, you're ideally going to remove Hero to All and Thread of Light. But getting into the epiphanies for it, these first 2 are pretty low value and not good because this first one is actually a fake draw. You may see the draw 3 and think it's a draw 3, but it's not, because if you read the text below it, apply link to those cards for this turn. And as we know, linked cards get discarded. So if you draw 3 and it applies linked to all 3, then you get to use 1, right? But you're discarding the other 2. So unless the other 2 scale off a discard, whether it be like a renewable or has quietus, then you're kind of losing value on it.
So this second Hero to All is really, really bad because it does not discriminate what it's linking. Like imagine you have a bunch of Adagios in hand and you discard this. That means every single Adagio that you have in hand will get discarded the moment any link card is played. I don't see why you would ever use this. There are other ways to link cards that isn't as sporadic as this. I don't see a use case for this. The other Heroes to All have better use cases. Third Hero to All is pretty good. It's a 0-cost haste, draw 1, so it's quite literally free, right? There's no AP, it recycles itself, and it's haste, so it's not boss mechanics aren't punishing you for playing this. And then it applies link to quietus cards in hand. This is pretty good with pretty much only Diana right now, but if we get more quietus characters in the future, you will probably be using this to help discard them for free. I kind of don't see why you would use Heidemarie as a discard support when you can just use Nia to discard most of their cards. But you know, maybe this will be useful in the future because at the very least, this is just a 0-mana draw 1 and it does nothing. This 4th Hero to All is actually really good. This is essentially just a 0-cost Joker. Like I remember in beta, Cassius Joker card used to be a 0-cost. This is exactly that except with 2 exhaust. But the only difference is that it links the card that you move, so you have to play around it a little differently. Like you don't want to draw something that you actually don't want to use immediately or don't want to discard. But this is very good. This is the only one I would ever consider keeping. If you don't land this epiphany on Hero to All, I would just remove it.
Then onto the 5th epiphany for Hero to All. Haste, draw 2 attack cards of this unit, apply linked to all attack cards in hand for this turn. The reason why this is kind of like niche is drawing 2 attack cards of this unit. That's not drawing like any card, it's just attack cards. So you're gonna dead draw and you can't cycle even further after you use this because you're just drawing attack cards. So that's one of the reasons why this is bad. You're also applying linked to all attack cards in hand. So if they're not scaling off a discard or have quietus, then you're just discarding all of your attack cards. You're losing a bunch of value. And the most optimal way to play this game is to cycle your entire 3 decks every turn. You don't want to be dead drawing, which is why the third one is S tier because it literally just does nothing. It's just like a neutral. Like it gets you one step closer to cycling your entire 3 decks. And yeah, those are the epiphanies ranked for the card Hero to All for Heidemarie. First one C tier, second one F tier, third and fourth S tier, and fifth one B tier. Moving on to the next card we have, which is a Thread of Light.
So for half of the builds, you're going to be playing on Heidemarie, which is the Nuke build. You will be removing Thread of Light. None of the Thread of Lights do anything that the Nuke build wants, but if you're playing the standard comp of just producing swords to discard and then do damage with, this is good to keep. There's only one you're going to use for that standard comp. All the others are more for swordy. So if you don't get this third Thread of Light, I would also just consider removing it, but it's still a good card.
Yeah, some of these epiphanies for Thread of Light are pretty good in swordy or chaos, such as like this fifth one. This one is really good in swordy because it does 420% damage times 2. But also, if you discard this, you'll do AoE. So it's kind of like, you know, whether you need single target or AoE, and it just nukes a ton.
So the first and second Thread of Light are literally the same. They just scale off of how many link cards that are in the hand. The second one obviously only scales up to 3 links and does triple the damage. First one can scale up to your hand size, right? The only reason why I would even consider the second one worse than the first one is because this one is 2 AP, and you do have issues in AP in swordy because of the lower power level format. So I would typically pick this first one over the second one, but the second one still does decent damage, and the fifth one is probably the best for swordy. I would not consider any of these 4 Threads of Light to be usable outside of the third one. The fourth one, I don't know who it's for. There's no one that can use this right now. I try to look through the roster to see if there's anything I can do to cook with this, but I don't think so. Like, first of all, it's 3 AP. That's really expensive. And second of all, it's exhaust. So even if there is a crazy synergy that we can play around with this only happens one time. You can debate me about this, but I think it's F tier.
And yeah, those are all the epiphanies for Thread of Light ranked. What we think about them: first one A tier, second one B tier, third one S tier, fourth one F tier, and fifth one B tier. The fifth one is pretty good and probably S tier in swordy and chaos. Moving on to the next card we have, which is Effulgent Expansion. So this card is going to be your main dupe target. This is the card you're going to want to copy the most, because this is how you're going to create the most blades, whether you're creating them in the graveyard for the Nuke build or in your hand for the blade build where you spam a lot of blades. So this first one is S tier because not only does it have linked, it also has quietus. So you can discard this and it'll activate, but it'll create 2 Effulgent blades, but also plus 70% damage amount to Effulgent blade for 1 turn. That's 3.5 morale. That is a pretty big buff if you're spamming a lot of blades each turn. So the first one, very solid option and one of the best here.
So this second Effulgent Expansion is not as good as the first one because 1, it doesn't have linked, so you're going to have to discard this manually somehow without other link cards, and 2, it's only 200% damage amount to the next 2 Effulgent blades. The first one affects all Effulgent blades that you're going to play for that turn. This one is only for the next 2. So the floor on this Effulgent Expansion is higher, but the ceiling is much lower. This is probably better for swordy because you're not going to have a bunch of copies of the plus 70 Effulgent expansions, and you're not going to really create that many blades. It's just generally worse than the first one, but you know, obviously better in swordy. So this third Effulgent Expansion, it's okay. It's pretty good for OTK if you get your entire hand full of Effulgent blades and then use it. Only issue is like you can only run 1 of it, and it's really not that much better than just running 3 of the first one. So ideally you would just not run this. If you do want to run it, this is like only a 1 of, and you can't use your AP for like anything else. This doesn't have quietus, so you will be spending 2 AP on this. You're specifically using this for like OTK because you do need to make sure that your other Effulgent expansions are used first, and then you get this. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of hand space issues.
And then on to the fourth epiphany for Effulgent Expansion. This is one of the best here. This is for Heidemarie's nuking comp. It's going to create 6 Effulgent blades in discard pile. And if you know what Effulgent Release does, it infinitely scales off of how many Effulgent blades are in the graveyard. Like we said earlier, Effulgent Release actually gets added to the base. So if you're stacking a ton of blades in the graveyard pile, it is like, you know, gonna be super giga broken for Effulgent Release, which is ideally why you want to copy 4 of this create 6 in the Nuke comp, because that's 24 each turn. Not to mention, if you're using somebody like Orlais, you're also buffing multiplicative to release, and you have vulnerable, which is the best debuff in the game, allowing the enemy to take more damage. And then on to the 5th Effulgent Expansion, this upgrade one. It is pretty similar to the first one, except that is a little less damage amount buff to the Effulgent blade, but it's also an upgrade, so it's passive. You don't actually need to spend AP every turn to use this. You don't need to spend AP for the first one since it has quietus, but you know, this is just passive, and for whatever reason, if you're running the 4-piece Spark of Passion set on Heidemarie, this can be a proc, but we don't really recommend the 4-piece Spark of Passion set. We'll talk about that later on when we get to the memory fragments.
You're only really going to be using this if you're running the first one as well. You're just going to split the epiphanies. You're going to have 3 of the first one and then 1 of the upgrade. However, if you're going for like an OTK comp, this doesn't create until the start of the next turn. It's not like Renoa's Echo of Sorrow upgrade where it creates 1 and then it creates 1 again at the start of every turn. So if you're going for big funny turn 1 numbers, you wouldn't go for this. But for anything past turn 1, this is highly recommended to split the Epiphany for higher consistency.
And yeah, that is her card, Effulgent Expansion. Epiphany's ranked. What we think about them: first one S tier, second B tier, and the last two are S tier also. Moving on to her last card we have, which is Effulgent Compression. So Effulgent Compression, this is going to be your main way of how you get Effulgent Release, which is her main nuking card that does so much damage. So you actually can't play Effulgent Compression itself, but when you discard it, you get Effulgent Light stacks. And once you reach 3 stacks, it'll turn Compression into Release. So you need to discard this 3 times to get Release, whether that be when you end the turn, or you can discard this with someone like Nia and get an Effulgent Light stack, which Effulgent Release, it'll exhaust all Effulgent Blades in graveyard, which is why we were talking about that 4th Effulgent Expansion that creates in the graveyard. This will scale Effulgent Release. Then it will give plus 100% damage to the base for each exhausted Effulgent Blade in the graveyard. And then at the end of the turn, this will change back into Effulgent Compression that you need to discard 3 more times to get Release again. If you're using something like the 3-cost Sword Rain that exhausts Effulgent Release, keep in mind that when you exhaust Effulgent Release, it's totally fine because Effulgent Release is a creation card. Each time you get 3 Effulgent Light stacks, it'll turn Compression into Release. So it's fine if you exhaust this with a 3-cost Sword Rain. It won't exhaust it for the entire battle since you'll be creating new ones.
So adding to base is very, very rare. The only characters that can do to base is Kayron, and only 1 Epiphany on Diana's bullets, the plus 100 per discarded bullet. Unlike Diana's discard bullet, this one is super easy to turbo scale, and much easier to scale than Kayron as well, because Kayron has to jump around hoops to exhaust his futilities. Heidemarie can create blades for free because all of her cards have quietus, so it is much easier to scale, and this is like the most blatant form of power creep I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, when Gordon was talking about Diana adding to base, he's talking about the 4th Epiphany for Pistol of Purification, the plus 100% one. I don't think he specified pistol, I think he just said bullet, so I just wanted to make that clear. And yeah, those are all of her cards and Epiphanies ranked. The Effulgent Compression, of course, if you're new to this game, you might not know, but each character has a card that can't get Epiphanies, which Effulgent Compression is that card for Heidemarie. It can't get an Epiphany. But moving on to the ego skill for Heidemarie, which is called Elysium of Blades. So 400% damage and plus 80% damage amount for each card discarded this battle, max 20 cards. This is pretty straightforward and easy to understand, not really much to say about it here. Ideally just want to use this when it's fully ramped up and you discarded 20 cards over the course of the entire battle. It's the battle, not turn, so keep that in mind. This will go to 2000%, which is a huge nuke, but yeah, no utility, it's just damage. And then moving on to the partners, first off we're starting with their designated partner, of course, called Sylvia. Basically Sylvia increases the assigned combat's attack by 16%. Each time the assigned combat linked cards are used manually or discarded, you'll gain this new buff called Zephyr, and when Zephyr reaches 3 stacks you get plus 20% critical damage to whoever it is equipped on. But not only do you get the critical damage, Zephyr is also going to be increasing the damage amount to the assigned combat's passionate attack cards with a max of 3 stacks, so plus 45%. But something we do need to clarify and say, if you have Heidemarie E6, this is actually not going to buff her Effulgent Blades that are all attribute cards. Not sure if that's a bug or if it's intended, if they're going to fix that, so keep that in mind when you pull for Sylvia. And then onto her ego skill called Field Overview. Select up to 2 cards in hand and apply Link. If a selected card is the assigned combat's linked card, you get plus 10% critical damage to the assigned combat for each such card instead. This ego skill is actually pretty good for Swordy and Chaos. This can come in clutch sometimes because in Swordy we're not going to have the best decks. We're going to be at a pretty low power level, so being able to apply linked to card you want to use without actually having to use another linked or quietus card instead can be beneficial. Like say you use this ego skill and you apply linked to her basic card Sword Flash, which buffs the damage amount for Effulgent Blades, and say you have like a Thread of Light with like quietus or something and a few Effulgent Blades in turn. You use the Sword Flash, which buffs the Effulgent Blade damage, and then it'll activate Thread of Light and the Effulgent Blades since they scale off a discard.
So this ego skill is even more crazy to think about because this plus 10% up to 20% critical damage is for the entire fight. It's not once per turn. Even if you're not using the link cards correctly, minimum you are getting 20% crit damage from this.
So yeah, that is plus 20% critical damage to Heidemarie, not only from the passive effect, but you're also getting another 20 from the ego skill for a total of 40% critical damage. And with the new 4-piece set that gives plus 15% critical chance to Passion or Void units when you discard a card, Heidemarie is going to be critting quite often. Sylvia is also a limited partner, such as Heidemarie being limited. I highly advise to always get 1 copy of the limited unit plus their partner, but if you can't get Sylvia, you can also go something like Rosaria, which is the best 4-star partner in the game. Rosaria is just so good because you can get so much morale with her, and a lot of units, such as Heidemarie being one of them, really wants morale. But yeah, everyone should at least have 1 copy of Rosaria. If you do not and you're a new player, highly advise to do Basin and get your copy there. But for whatever reason, if you can't clear Basin, you could do a few temples on Sylvia banner, maybe get lucky and get Sylvia earlier, or even if you don't get Sylvia early, Rosaria is still on the 4-star rate up for the Sylvia banner. There's some honorable mentions mentions for the A tier we can say, such as Solia or even Daisy, but we don't really recommend either of those because Rosaria and Sylvia are just on another level compared to them. So won't say much about them, but you know, alternative options if you have them. And then moving on to the potentials for Heidemarie, starting off with this first major node, add the following effect to Sword Flash, which is her basic card, plus 30% damage amount to Effulgent Blade for 1 turn. This is actually pretty good for sorting and chaos, so if you're doing a lot of runs in those, definitely recommend picking up this potential. We also have the critical damage node and the crit chance node, which are, you know, standard DPS nodes. Highly advised to 5 out of 5 both of these so you can get the most crit chance and crit damage. It is very easy to get high crit chance with Heidemarie due to the new 4-piece set being added, which is an extra 15%. Most endgame people can reach 60 without any set buffs, so that's 75%. Not to mention if you're running Orlea, that's another 6%, and there is a new equipment in the chaos that gives another 10%. It gives 2% critical chance for each stack, and it has a max of 5 stacks. It is a blue gauntlet gear, so you could easily get upwards of 90% crit rate on Heidemarie. And then moving on to her next node, plus 5% damage amount to Heidemarie's Sword Flash. Like I said earlier, her basic card, and if Heidemarie's attack is greater than 500, add additional plus 5% to the modifier. Everyone should be getting this because that is not a very high threshold. You said that Heidemarie's base attack was over 500, right, Gordon?
Yeah, this is free actually. You can just pick this up and like if you have no gear or partner, you still hit this. So Heidemarie has one of the best potential 7s in the game. It's a elemental damage, so it's a final damage modifier just like extra attack. This potential 7 is so easy to hit. Not only does she have the highest base stat in the game, she's a ranger, but for some reason she has 10 extra attack over Hugo, who's also a ranger. This potential 7 is so easy to hit. You can hit this with one main stat attack 25% and just like whatever gear. The thing is, right, she has so much base attack and her requirements are lower than strikers and psionics who have to hit 1,000. This is such a blatant form of power creep. It's actually crazy, but you know, this is a great potential. Just pick it up.
Yeah, I have 974 attack on my Heidemarie, so like I'm well above the 600 threshold, so everyone should be hitting this very easily.
There's a couple things that this potential 7 does to the way you build her memory fragments. This potential 7 actually overrepresents passion damage in her kit, so that means for the 5th slot you actually attack percent is more optimal on her.
Yeah, if you want to min-max down to the, you know, minute detail, you can, but I suggest going whichever piece has more positive rolls for the 5th slot, whether it be passion or attack percentage, whatever has the best.
So the first comp that we're going to go over is the standard comp. This is going to be the easiest comp to really build decks for because you're not going to really need any divines for this deck. We are going to have the first sword rain. It creates 2. This is the most amount of damage. And then we're going to use the plus 80 damage amount to link cards Thread of Light because it's the only one that's good. And then we're going to dupe Effulgent Expansions 4 times. Whether or not you want to split the Epiphany is up to you. Having the upgrade does make the deck more consistent, but having that upgrade also makes your turn 1 a little bit less explosive. It's really up to you whether or not you do want to roll this Epiphany. And then obviously for like basically every deck, we're going to be keeping Effulgent Compression except for like one deck, but I don't really recommend that comp. We're going to talk about that later though. There's something very important that you have to understand about this season when making decks for her, specifically for her standard comp and her sword comp. There is a persona card that you want to go for. It's the discard 2 into 60% for each discarded, and then you want to get the engravings that increase 30% multiplicative for 1 turn. So this goes up to 60%. So if we have this persona card, it is 120 additive and 60% multiplicative. She uses both additive and multiplicative very well. However, if you can't get this exact persona, the deck is bricked. Like I would just consider just making a new deck. And this Nia deck is pretty standard. Don't worry about that hunger. Don't need that hunger. Just fill it with like morale gear bag. It really doesn't matter. But you do need to split Soul Rift Epiphanies because you are going to miss out on a lot of damage without this retained Soul Rift, where every time you discard a card, the combatant that owns that card does 100% extra attack to a random enemy. You're going to be discarding a lot. This will add like thousands of damage. You do not want to miss out on this. This Soul Rift upgrade is the only way Nia is sustaining the team, so you need both of these. So you're gonna have to find a way to split these Epiphanies. You can use a flash on this deck. I did that. And then for the Adagio, it's the same one that you know, the draw 1, and then you can choose whether or not you want to discard, and then you have Nia's Curiosity. Remove everything else. Everything else is bad on her kit. And then for the final slot for this comp, Ray, Cassius, Beryl, they all work. Just run a morale bot. Whoever can stack as much morale as possible, just run them.
And then on to the next deck we have, which is the Nuke deck for Heidemarie. So here we have the 3-cost Sword Rain. This can be replaced with the Epiphany 1 Sword Rain. You know, either are interchangeable. You can go either, but you know, Sword Rain does have AoE in case you need AoE for some content. Then we have 4 Effulgent Expansions on the create 6 Effulgent Blades in Graveyard Epiphany. Now the decks we show in this video have Divine Epiphanies, but you do not need Divines for this to work. If you saw my previous video, the E0 showcase using the Nuke build, she definitely doesn't need divines. They will help and make it easier to cycle your entire deck, but definitely not needed. Basically, just spam a ton of Effulgent Expansions, create a bunch of Effulgent Blades in the discard pile, and then you scale the 3-cost Sword Rain or your Effulgent Release. Very easy to play in autopilot, not too much thinking going on in this deck. The Nia deck is kind of similar to the last one in the last comp, except, you know, you're just going one Soul Rift, you're going the Adagio Epiphany that creates one Adagio with exhaust, and then you don't need the gear bags, they're just there if you potentially can get them with morale. And then onto Orlea, probably the most important deck here that you need to take into consideration, because Orlea's deck, it does need the draw divine for it to cycle itself and, you know, cycle your entire 3 decks every turn. If you don't care about cycling your entire 3 decks every turn, you're okay with clearing everything a few turns after, then you don't need the divine. But the divine is like, makes it a lot easier. And you want to split the growth acceleration epiphanies. You want 3 0-cost ones and then one 1-cost one with vulnerable, because if you don't have the vulnerable one, then you're missing out on a ton of damage, since vulnerable is the best debuff in the game. It makes the enemy take a ton more damage.
So if you do not want to farm a divine deck for Orlea, just get rid of all 3 of the 0-cost growth accelerations. You know, the ceiling is going to be much lower, but it is more damage to just play your Effulgent Release every turn than to like maybe do your nuke every other turn, right? Obviously, the most optimal way to play is with 4 growth accelerations, but with how divines are this season, if you don't have this deck already, you can just keep 1 growth excel. For a 3-card deck, that's only 1 to your cycle.
Yeah, because Sacred Sensor is getting procced by the multifaceted rare accessory, and then Growing Creature has Retained. You'll always have that in your hand, and then you'll be cycling the growth acceleration.
There's another very good comp, but this requires 3 divine decks, so I don't know how realistic it is to build this season. However, if you do want to go for this is very strong. I think this is probably more damage than both the standard and the nuke build, but also it's, you know, it depends on the boss, right? If the boss gets hit and it gets a ton of morale based off of how many times it gets hit, it wouldn't be good, right? You'd rather use the nuke comp, so it depends. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna have 4 sword rains, because every time we use a sword rain that activates 5 Effulgent Blades, it's gonna proc Selina's high power scope, one of the drone bombings that performs an extra attack on hitting attack weakness, and then a drone bombing when a passion card is used. So Selina's adding 3 extra hits per sword, and then we're just going to have a 1 Effulgent Expansion to just get the 6 into the discard pile. We don't need more, and we're keeping Effulgent Compression, just, you know, every so often we'll get a nuke for free. Over here on Selina, it's just high power scope, skill drone bombing, and drone bombing upgrade. So there's a reason why this divine deck is even worse to farm for, is because you actually need to split divines. 2 of your sword rains need to be reduced cost, and 2 of them needs to be on draw, or else you won't have enough AP to play them, or you won't have enough cycle to play through your entire deck. And Cassius, it's the same comp that you see. It's a morale Cassius with cost reduction to morale devil dice. Okay, the only reason why we're going to include this comp is because people want to run Diana with Heidemarie, right? They're released side by side. They both have quietus. They both do discards. Unfortunately, they are not good together because they're both main damage dealers. They don't do anything that each other want. Like Heidemarie doesn't make bullets, and Diana really doesn't provide any buffs at all, so Heidemarie's damage plummets. But if you do want to play these 2 characters together, I think this deck is good enough. Don't expect it to do that much damage, but it will work. This comp, basically, instead of using Blooming Love to discard everything in hand, we just use this first hero to all, draw 1, and then apply Link to Quietus cards in hand for this turn. You know, it's just a side grade of Blooming Love, and then you have Thread of Light to buff for Diana. You know, we're turning Heidemarie into a discard support for Diana.
Which is why Heidemarie is like not really that good with Diana, because Heidemarie just does like 1,000 times more damage than Diana, so like it's really just for the purpose of having fun. Like if you want to clear content, why would you use a unit that does 1,000 less damage than the OP one? So then onto the weapon gear slot, and what are the best weapons to farm for in Chaos or Sortie. So starting off with the Cthulhu gun, the name actually just got changed. It's Criticism of Discord now. It used to be Intellect of Discord. This is best slot for the weapon slot for every DPS, so of course, you know, if you can't get this, really good, plus 18% attack. If you can't get this, you can also get Tentacles of a Ruined Age, previously known as Tentacles of Chaos, from Cthulhu also. It's 8% ally attack. That is to the wearer also. So, you know, if you're running Heidemarie, Nia, and Orlea, everyone in the team is going to get 8% attack. There is a new weapon in this Chaos called Corrupted Gauntlet. On extra attack, increase critical chance by 2% for 1 turn, 5 times per turn. You know, that's 10% critical chance on 5 extra attacks. More critical chance is always good. Definitely highly recommend that if you can't get the first 2.
Just a reminder that this is on extra attack, so if you're playing the nuke comp that doesn't use any swords for damage, this will not ramp up at all, so you will want to use something else. So Order's Baton is very easy to proc. It's going to be additive 40 damage for 1 turn. There's no reason to not take this. It's better than Second Method, because Second Method is only 2 extra attack. Not only is this 5% better than Second Method, it also buffs the damage of your Effulgent Release, because Effulgent Release is not extra attack. So the chess pieces for this season aren't terrific. There are a couple, so we will go over them, but it's not going to be as good as Fairy King's Crown. Rest in peace, Swamp of Judgment. So the first and the most universal chess piece, the only one that's ever worth just universally taking is Mask of Emotions. When attacked, 2 resonance to the attacker, so it stacks up to 6 times a turn. You know, extra resonance, she likes extra attack. It's just extra damage, but without the crit chance that we sorely miss. So this Crushed Angel Feather, I got this from an event on floor 2. I don't know if you can get it somewhere else. So the effect looks weird, right? When an ally link card is used, increase action count of all enemies by 2. This doesn't matter, right? You don't really care about increasing action count. However, there are engravings that buff allies attack cards or like the whole team's attacks if you increase action count by an enemy. So if you see this and you have an engraving that's like, you know, enemy action count is increased plus 50% damage amount to all allies, right? That's an actual engraving. You would pick this up. Same thing with Nightmare Hairpin. You know, if you have that engraving that procs off of increasing action count, this is a great chess piece to have. Otherwise, these would be worthless.
And if you can't get any of these 3 because these are from the new Chaos, from the shop you can get Reinforced Combat Suit, which gives 60% fixed shield at the end of the turn. Every turn, it's not the battle, it's some shield at the end of the turn if you're having trouble surviving, or if you just want the static for the defense, you can go Reinforced Combat Suit. And then onto the accessory gear slots. First off, we have Dimensional Cube. When a card is discarded by an ally, plus 50% damage amount for 1 turn, max 3 times. So that is plus a 45% damage amount to whoever has this equipped. This is a level 30 exploration unlock from the Zero System world called Blue Pot, so you're not going to have this straight out the gate if you're a newer player, but highly recommend to, you know, grind Blue Pot for this specific accessory. If you can't get or don't want to farm for, you know, Dimensional Cube, you can go Amorphous Cube. This gives plus 25% damage amount. This also can spawn in the shop, so it's very easy to get. Almost twice as less as Dimensional Cube, but plus 25% is still a good amount.
So Gospel of Lament is the level 30 exploration for the theater planet that we're having this season. So you do have to be level 30 exploration to get this. However, this is a pretty good accessory. It's plus 30 damage amount to ally attack cards for 1 turn, right? So you can actually have this on your support. You don't actually even need this on your damage dealer. So this is an extra min-max that we can do. As we said, there are engravings that either increase action account or do something when you increase action account. So there's no reason to not just have this on your support in case you have like a chess piece that does something or an engraving that also does something. And then last is Sphere Randomness. You know, if you want to keep Sphere, you can have it, but I would rather have a damage increase and have Sphere on another support instead.
And then onto the memory fragments. So with the latest patch, we actually just got a new 4-piece set called a Prelude to a Hero. When a passion or void attribute attack card of this unit is discarded, plus 15% critical chance for 1 turn, max 15%, max 2 stacks. So a lot of people are confused about that 2 stacks, thinking it is 30% critical chance, when in reality it is not. The max 2 stacks is for the turn amount. So you get plus 15% critical chance for 2 turns, not 30% critical chance for 1 turn. That is very important to state because this set would be absolutely busted if it was 30% critical chance. Since it is a new set, you know, a lot of people aren't going to have the best substats for it. If you are going Prelude to a Hero, the new 4-piece set, you want to go 2-piece critical damage set for the last 2 slots. But if you do not want to go 4-2, you also can go 2-2 of just 2-piece critical damage set and 2-piece attack set, which, you know, a lot more people have those sets farmed and they're universal and be used on any character. I can vaguely mention the 4-piece Spark of Passion set just because technically it is usable in Heidemarie, but, you know, me and Gordon definitely do not recommend it. Not only does Heidemarie not have a lot of upgrade cards, but the new 4-piece set and, you know, just 2-2 of crit damage and attack are just way higher ceiling than a 4-piece Spark of Passion set.
There is another 4 set that you can run with Conqueror set. The only issue with Conqueror set is it doesn't actually increase the damage of your Effulgent release because that's a 0 cost, right? Your swords are 1 cost, but your release will always be 0. So I really wouldn't recommend the Conqueror set. I mean, if you have like insane substats on Conqueror, you would obviously run it, right? The better substats will always outpace your set bonus. And then if you don't want to farm any of these 4 sets, you know, 2-2 is more than enough. So the main stat set you want on this character is crit chance, attack on 5th slot, and then attack on 6th slot. So the reason why we're skipping passion damage on the 5th slot is because our potential 7 already gives us 15% element damage. So we're already over-representing element damage with just the potentials. So I plugged in the stats of these 2 builds in a calc, and it seems that the new passion set with 2-piece crit damage with attack 5 slot, it's a little under 3% better than element on the 5th slot. And then if you do care about this number, 2-2 set, attack and crit damage set without the 4 set, it's around 5.3% worse than 4-2 with double attack. So you definitely want attack percent on your cup. However, if you have a passion set cup with better substats than your attack percent cup, you definitely want to run that over attack percent because obviously the more positive rolls do you have on your substats, the more damage is going to actually be, right? Ideally, in a perfect world, you do want 4-2 with crit attack, but just be aware that if you have a lot of positive substat rolls, it will always outpace what the ideal is, right? Like, we're not playing in Disneyland here. We are playing in reality where people don't have perfect rolls on everything.
And then for the substats, you kind of just want, the basic DPS substats, crit chance, crit damage. Since you do extra attacks with Heidemarie, of course you want extra damage, but if you are specifically running the Nuke comp that doesn't do any extra attacks, you do not want extra damage. And then, you can either go attack percent or attack flat, or, the fourth substat.
Her dupes are very good. Her E1 increases your Effulgent release base damage by 200, and then the scaling to 120, right? And we know that the scaling also to base, so that's an extra 20 per sword to base. This is very, very, very strong, especially for the Nuke build. This is probably one of the best E1s in terms of damage increase that I've seen in this game. The only other character that comes close is probably Rin. So this E2 is also really good. There's two effects. First one, at start of battle, move Effulgent Compression card to hand. This is not only good quality of life, but this is also good for your turn 1 setup for save data content. You obviously want Effulgent Compression as soon as possible so you can discard them until you can get your release. And then the second effect, it's okay. You get around 600% extra attack damage because you get 120 times 5. Right now it doesn't look that crazy, right? But just wait, it gets better from here. And E3, this is quite a big damage increase to her ego skill. Obviously you're only gonna use her ego skill like 1 time per fight. This is important for Swordy specifically. You're not really gonna care about this in save data content, but very, very big damage increase for sure. Heidemarie's E4 is actually insane. For most characters E4, they either have to do something like really specific to proc it, or it only lasts for 1 turn. Not only is her E4 super easy to do, all you have to do is discard Heidemarie's link cards and you gain Effulgent Chain. You gain 50% additive. This is for the entire fight. I don't think there's any other characters that do this other than Haru's E4. If we take a look at Serenial's E4, she gains up to 50% additive, and it says only for 1 turn. We have even more power creep in this character's kit. But yeah, this is a super, super good E4 comparatively to like all the other E4s in the game. E5, throwaway, who cares? Actually, no, this does matter a lot for her Effulgent release because Effulgent release's base damage is crazy. So adding an extra 6% to her base damage for Effulgent release is actually quite a big deal. Obviously, the E5 is still kind of throwaway, but it's at least better than other characters, specifically because she has such a big Nuke card. And then this E6 might be one of the best dupes I've ever seen for this game. I don't think any other dupes come close. So your Effulgent blades become all attribute cards, which means it always procs elemental advantage. Obviously, it doesn't matter for her Nuke build where she isn't really using the blades, but for all her other builds, this is crazy. You can pretty much use her to carry any planet if you have her E6. You can like bring a sustainer and then bring someone that you're building and just have her as the damage dealer. And if you have this, you'll always be doing attack weakness. Crazy E6. But not only that, take a look at this. Crimson Blade activation, the E2, this gains plus 40 amount every time Crimson Blade is activated, up to 480%. So at max stack, your Crimson Blades are going to be doing 600% per proc, which means you will gain 3,000 extra attack damage every turn just by existing. 3,000 extra attack is more than like a ton of the main damage dealers base damage in this game. It's actually kind of crazy that her E6 is just an entire character's kit.
Something I also want to add on about the E6, like I said earlier, once you do get her E6, you no longer get the passion buff from Sylvia, her designated partner, so keep that in mind. This just could be a bug because technically like all attribute includes passion, so you think that it's still a passion card, but maybe it's just a bug right now because that's what everyone has been saying in the Discord. And yeah, those are all of her ego manifestations, her dupes on how good they are, whether you should get them. Like, she definitely has some of the best dupes in the game, so it is not a bad idea if you do want to pull multiple copies. And then next and lastly, we have the team compositions. So like we said earlier about the recommended decks, we went over some of the team comps there. The new comp ideally wants Heidemarie, Orlea, and Nia there for the discard support, Orlea there for the multiplicative buffs to Effulgent release and the vulnerable, stack a bunch of damage. And then Heidemarie is just going to be using the Nuke build where you create a bunch of Effulgent blades in the graveyard to scale Effulgent release. We can honestly make this very short since we said a lot of the stuff they needed to hear for the team comps over the decks. Yeah, the Diana team is just going to be an honorable mention since we don't really suggest running Diana with Heidemarie. Ideally would want one of the first 3 over the Diana team. But yeah, that's going to be the video. I hope this video was informative. I hope it was helpful. If it was, I'd very much appreciate it if you could show love to the channel. Whether you like, comment, subscribe, it all helps a ton, and I'd very much appreciate it. Let me know what your guys' thoughts on Heidemarie is in the comments down below. If there are any other guides or specific videos you want us to do in the future, let me know down below also in the comments. The hype and demand is there, then I'll consider making a guide for those older characters, but right now I'm just really focused on the newer units. We are almost at 4K subscribers. We've been growing pretty fast and rapidly, so thank you guys. But yeah, that's gonna be the video. I hope you guys take care, peace, and be safe until the next one.